The old Barrow farm had stood rotting at the edge of Pine Hollow for nearly 70 years, long after the land had stopped yielding crops, and long after anyone dared to till its cursed soil. Locals avoided it, steering wide circles with hushed tones and warding signs scratched into their skin with dull nails. They said the wind moaned differently near that land. They said the shadows walked on their own. Still, when Jacob Langley inherited the place from a distant relative he never met, the allure of starting over was too strong to resist. After a bitter divorce and losing his job in Chicago, he drove cross-country with a truck full of boxes, a half-eaten bag of sunflower seeds, and the kind of optimism born from desperation. The farm was nestled in a shallow valley. Acres of withered cornstalks stood like skeletal sentinels under a gray, dead sky. The main house was a decrepit two-story structure leaning into itself like it had secrets too heavy to carry. Its red paint had long since peeled away, exposing the splintered ribs of the wood beneath. A rusted weather vane on the roof spun slowly despite the still air. Jacob stepped out of his truck and lit a cigarette, scanning the overgrown fields with mild unease. The wind didn't blow, yet the corn rustled, not in the chaotic way it should when swayed by a breeze, but with strange, patterned movement. Like something alive, creeping just beneath the surface. Probably raccoons, Jacob muttered to himself, grinding the cigarette underfoot. Or some backwoods deer. He walked up the front porch, every creaking board announcing his arrival to whatever still listened. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mold, rot, and something coppery, like old blood soaked into wood. Dust coated everything, pictures on the walls, lace curtains that hung stiff like corpses, and antique furniture that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. In the living room, an old photograph sat atop the fireplace mantel. It showed a family of 5, the Barrow family, he assumed, with hollow smiles and eyes that looked too dark to reflect light. The children looked particularly strange, faces pale and waxy, eyes wide, almost terrified. Their expressions didn't match the supposed joy of the photograph. Something about them made Jacob turn the frame face down. That night, Jacob lay on the sagging mattress in the upstairs bedroom, listening to the house breathe. The walls popped inside. The floorboards whispered under phantom footsteps. At around 2:13 a.m., he awoke with a start, heart hammering against his ribs. From the open window, he heard it, a low, murmuring whisper rising from the cornfield. Not wind. Not insects. Words. Faint. Shifting. Wrong. Jacob. Jacob, come see, harvest, harvest. He blinked into the darkness, the sound sliding along his skin like cold, wet fingers. He told himself it was a dream, a stress-induced hallucination. He got up, slammed the window shut, and told himself not to listen. But sleep never came again. The next morning, he found claw marks on the inside of the bedroom door. Long, deep gouges, as if something had been trying to escape, not get in. Outside, the cornfield swayed in rhythmic pulses, though the air remained perfectly still. Jacob walked the edge of the rows, unable to shake the feeling that something was watching him. Not an animal. Not a person. Something, below. Halfway through the field, he noticed a peculiar patch, the stalks were taller, thicker, almost black in color. And they leaned inward, forming a near-perfect circle around a narrow pit in the ground. It hadn't been there yesterday. At least, he hadn't seen it. From that pit, came a smell like burning hair and spoiled milk. He backed away. That evening, Jacob decided to search the basement. He wanted to find the breaker box, maybe clean up some of the old wiring. The stairs groaned under his weight as he descended into the dark, flashlight in hand. The beam flicked across old crates, rusted tools, and something else, a line of hand-carved wooden dolls, hanging by their necks from twine. Each had a name scrawled into its chest. The names matched those on the family photo he'd turned over: Joseph, Edith, Mabel, Tommy, and Ruth. The doll labeled Tommy had its eyes gouged out, replaced with corn kernels jammed into the sockets. Jacob turned and ran up the stairs. As he reached the top, he heard it behind him, scratching, frantic and rapid, like nails clawing up the wood. But when he turned around, nothing was there. That night, he locked every door and window. He sat in the kitchen with a shotgun across his lap, trying to convince himself that everything had a rational explanation. He hadn't noticed until just before midnight, the floor beneath his feet was warm. Warmer than it should be. It was pulsing. Like something buried deep under the house had begun to stir. And then, once again, the whispers returned. Jacob, join the harvest, feed the soil. He stood slowly, moving toward the kitchen window. Outside, in the moonlight, he saw them. Figures. Pale, thin, twitching. Dozens of them, standing just at the edge of the cornfield. Eyes glowing faintly. Mouths whispering in unison. One stepped forward, raising a hand. In it was the doll labeled Jacob. Its chest was still blank. Jacob didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, shotgun clenched in trembling hands, sweat pouring down his neck. His eyes stayed locked on the window where the pale figures had stood hours before. But with the dawn, they were gone, vanished like mist in morning light. The only thing that remained was a small object on the porch. He approached it slowly, cautiously, heart pounding louder with each step. It was the doll. The one that bore his name. Now its chest wasn't blank anymore. A single, thin red line had been carved into it, a fresh wound. Blood. Real blood. Jacob stumbled back into the house and locked the door. This wasn't a dream. Something terrible was alive on this land. He needed answers. He needed to understand what the hell was happening before he ended up like the others. In the attic, he found a stack of dusty, rotting boxes. Inside one was a brittle leather-bound journal belonging to Joseph Barrow, the original owner of the farm. The entries started out normal. Crop records, livestock tallies, weather patterns. But as the years passed, the tone grew darker, more erratic. Spring, 1953, the land is failing. The crops rot before harvest. Ruth says the soil is cursed. Tommy won't speak anymore. Just stares into the corn like he hears something. July, 1953, heard the voices again last night. Whispering in the fields. Promising bountiful crops, if we give them what they want. August, Ruth made the first doll. Said it keeps the harvesters at bay. But it only got worse. Edith says we need to finish the circle. 5 dolls. 5 names. 5 offerings. Jacob flipped to the last page. It was barely legible, scrawled in frantic ink, the words trembling off the edge of the page. The soil must be fed. It remembers. It never forgets. Beneath the passage was a crude drawing of the cornfield and a large black X where the pit was now located, as if even back then, they knew something was buried there. Or worse, something still alive. He closed the journal, hands shaking. Outside, a sudden gust of wind howled across the field. The corn didn't sway in a natural wave. Instead, it bent sharply toward the house, as if drawn by hunger. Jacob stood frozen at the attic window, unable to look away. From the center of the pit, something rose, a shape, tall and thin, humanoid but wrong. Its limbs were too long. Its head hung low, like it couldn't bear the weight of its own face. From this distance, he couldn't see eyes or a mouth. But it turned, slowly, and looked directly at him. Jacob slammed the attic window shut and backed away. Later that afternoon, he returned to town, determined to learn more. At the local library, he found an elderly woman with a name tag that read Martha. When he mentioned the Barrow farm, her smile faded. "You inherited that place," she said, voice trembling. "You poor, Poor man. Jacob nodded. Do you know what happened there? Martha looked around, lowered her voice, and beckoned him closer. They made a pact, she whispered. The barrows. In the old days, farmers used to talk about spirits of the land. Old gods. Forgotten things. Some tried to appease them with offerings, animals, crops. But the barrows, they gave blood. They fed the land people. It was supposed to make the soil fertile again. Jacob felt sick. What happened to them? They vanished, Martha said. One by one. First the boy, then the mother. No graves. No remains. Just gone. Some say they're still there, under the ground, part of the field now. Bound by the pact. The last one, Joseph, was found hanging in the barn. Dolls nailed to the walls around him. Jacob swallowed hard. The dolls. She nodded grimly. Each one a soul bound in twine and wood. You find one with your name on it? Her eyes narrowed. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Then you need to leave. Now. Before the second mark is carved. That night, Jacob tried. He packed his bags, grabbed the keys, and rushed to the truck. But when he turned the ignition, nothing happened. The battery was dead. He ran back to the house, hoping to call for help, only to discover every wire in the fuse box had been cut, and the landline torn from the wall. The farm wouldn't let him leave. Back inside the kitchen, he found the doll on the table. Now there were 2 cuts on its chest. He gasped, falling back in horror. As he did, he heard it, a faint scraping sound from upstairs. Footsteps dragging across the floor. Who's there? He called out, raising the shotgun. No answer. Just silence. Then, a child's giggle. He climbed the stairs slowly, heart beating like a war drum. The hallway was dark, but at the end, the door to the children's bedroom stood ajar. Jacob pushed it open with the barrel of the gun. Inside were the other 4 dolls, the Barrow children, seated in a semicircle on the floor. They had been moved. In the center sat the Jacob doll, freshly carved cuts down its face, mimicking his own features. As he stared, the room grew colder. The shadows stretched. And from the closet, something moved. Creak. Scratch. A hand emerged, bony, pale, impossibly long. Followed by a face that wasn't human anymore. A face made of wood, twine, and meat. Time for the harvest, it whispered. Jacob slammed the door shut, heart pounding, locking the abomination inside the room. It banged once, softly, as if testing his will. Then silence. The dolls. The face in the closet. The cuts on his own doll, they weren't just symbols. They were stages. He rushed down the stairs, shotgun in hand, sweat burning his eyes. He had to destroy that pit, whatever came from it, whatever the Barrows had summoned or buried there, it had to end. But something inside him whispered the truth he didn't want to hear, you're already part of it now. Outside, the wind had died completely. The world was still. Too still. Even the insects were silent. The cornfield loomed like a wall of brittle yellow teeth as he approached the center. The scarecrow was back, though he was sure he had burned it the day before. Its head turned as he passed. Just slightly. Just enough. Jacob didn't look back. He stopped at the edge of the pit. The soil around it had turned dark, like ash soaked in old blood. The edges crumbled beneath his feet, whispering as they fell into the blackness. He peered down. It wasn't a pit anymore. It was a tunnel. And it was breathing. Not in a metaphorical way, the earth moved in slow, wet rhythms, rising and falling like a sleeping animal. The air that drifted up was damp, rotten, and thick with an unbearable stench of decay. Then something stirred below. A rustle. A sound like nails scraping wood. Jacob aimed the shotgun and fired into the darkness. The blast echoed. Something hissed in reply. Then, the whispers began. They came from the corn. They came from beneath. They came from inside his head. You are chosen. You are sown. You are harvest. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet gave way. He plunged down, tumbling through wet roots and broken bones. His flashlight bounced beside him, flickering, illuminating glimpses of walls covered in handprints, small ones, and dolls stitched into the very dirt. He hit the ground hard, breath knocked out of him. When he opened his eyes, he saw the carvings. Symbols. Circles. Eyes. Mouths. And names, hundreds of them, etched into the stone in blood. At the center of the chamber was a tree, upside down, its roots hanging like veins, twitching. Beneath it, something pulsed. It wasn't human. Its form shifted like it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. Part flesh, part wood, part shadow. It had faces, too many, all stitched to its body like masks. And in its long fingers, it held a needle and thread, stitching a new doll with Jacob's hair wrapped into it. Jacob crawled back, but the creature didn't follow. It simply stared with eyes that glowed from within its chest. And it spoke, not in words, but in memory. Jacob saw visions explode in his mind. A child dragged through the corn, screaming. A woman sobbing as her own hand was forced to carve a doll. A man hanging from a rafter, whispering, it was the only way to survive. Earth soaked in blood, season after season. And then he saw himself. Bound. Buried. Rooted. A vessel. The vision broke, and Jacob was on his feet, staggering toward a wooden ladder half buried in the muck. He climbed, breath ragged, pulling himself out of the breathing womb of the earth. Behind him, the creature moaned, a deep, ancient groan that shook the corn and rattled the sky. When he surfaced, the sun had turned red. The scarecrow was gone. And in its place stood 5 figures. They wore sacks over their heads, stitched crudely with eyes and mouths. Each held a doll. One by one, they placed the dolls on the ground. Jacob watched in frozen terror as the dolls stood up, their little limbs jerking with unnatural life. The last doll, his own, turned its head toward him. A third wound had been carved into its chest. Jacob screamed. He ran. Through the corn. Through the blood-wet soil. Through the shadows that now moved faster than the wind. When he reached the house, the front door was open. The dolls were inside. They lined the walls, the staircase, even the kitchen. All watching. His phone was gone. The truck still dead. He went to the barn. The horses were gone. The livestock. Rotten, hollowed out like husks. The air in the barn was thick with mold and flies. In the hayloft, something hung from the rafters. Jacob climbed up slowly. There, swinging gently in the warm air, was a body. Not old. Not long dead. It was him. A mirror of his own face, mouth gaping, doll stitched into its chest. He fell to his knees, weeping, dry heaving. Then, he noticed something worse. The sound behind him. The gentle, patient sound of something sharpening a blade on stone. He turned. One of the sack-headed figures was there. Up close now. He could see through the holes in the burlap. Eyes. Too many eyes. And none of them were human. It raised the carving knife, voice low and wet. Only 2 more cuts. Then you'll belong to the harvest. Chapter 4, The Harvest Moon. The night sky had split open. The moon above Jacob's farmhouse hung impossibly large, bloated, red, and seeping light like an open wound. It pulsed in rhythm with the whispering that now filled every corner of the land. The corn swayed without wind. The dolls moved when unseen. And Jacob, clutching his shotgun, was no longer sure where the world ended and the nightmare began. He'd locked himself in the cellar. Blood still oozed from the scratches on his arms, claw marks that hadn't been there minutes ago. He hadn't made them. The voice echoed again, low, ancient, and full of teeth. You are sown. You are root. You will rise with the harvest. He screamed and fired into the dark, the shot echoing against the stone walls. Nothing was there. But something laughed. Something just beneath the ground. Then the cellar door creaked. Not the one behind him. The hidden one. Jacob's father had boarded it up decades ago, a slab of rotted oak tucked behind the wine shelves. Never open it, he used to say. That part of the farm ain't ours. Jacob had always thought it was just an old root cellar, or maybe a place his grandfather buried shame. But now it was opening on its own. One slow inch at a time. The air that rose from it was wrong. Sour and warm like breath from something dead. The flickering light bulb above cracked and went black. The whispering got louder. The same phrase. Over and over again. The harvest begins. The harvest begins. The harvest begins. A hand reached out from the cellar. Not human. Long, pale, with dirt beneath every nail and stitching running along the wrist like someone had built it from scraps. Jacob aimed the shotgun and fired. The arm recoiled, but did not fall. It gripped the edge again. Then came another hand. And another. They pulled themselves up, 4 of them. Headless at first. Doll heads swayed from their necks by strings, spinning slowly as they climbed. Each one chanted without a mouth. Jacob ran. Up the stairs, through the kitchen, over the fallen dining table now covered in dolls wearing his family's faces. He bolted the front door, dragged a cabinet in front of it, and stumbled backward into the parlor. There, the television turned on by itself. Static. Then a clear image. The field. And him. Standing among the corn in a circle of fire, naked, with roots piercing his arms and legs. Screaming. He looked at the image. Then looked down. He was bleeding. The same places. Same wounds. This was no longer just haunting. It was becoming. The sound of chanting drifted in from the windows. He peeked through the curtain. Figures in burlap hoods stood in a wide circle around the barn. Bonfires blazed, casting shadows against the moonlight. At the center of the circle was a massive effigy, branches woven together in the shape of a man, 20 feet tall, stuffed with hay and bones. And inside the effigy, he could see movement. Something alive. Something screaming. Then he saw her. Emily. His sister. The one who disappeared 20 years ago. Her face peeked from the effigy's chest, stitched at the mouth, tears leaking from her eyes. Her fingers moved weakly against the wooden frame. Jacob's soul shattered. He had to stop this. He grabbed the kerosene from the basement, filled a can, and rushed out through the back, shotgun in hand. The corn parted for him, like it wanted him there. Like the field hungered for the finale. As he approached the ritual circle, no one stopped him. The cultists turned toward him and bowed. Their stitched mouths opened. They spoke as one. Welcome, seed-bearer. You return to your roots. He aimed his gun and shot one of them in the head. The sack fell off. No head beneath. Just a hollow of soil, worms, and a tongue that slithered and twitched. Jacob screamed. He tossed the kerosene at the effigy. But it didn't burn. The flames around it bent away, protecting it. The fire wasn't fire. It was alive. It hissed when he got near, and whispered, "He's not ready yet." Then the ground cracked beneath him. Roots burst upward like serpents, coiling around his legs, piercing flesh. He dropped the shotgun, falling to his knees. The cultists encircled him, arms raised, chanting louder. The moon pulsed again. The effigy began to breathe. Emily screamed, but no sound came out. Blood poured from her stitched mouth. Then Jacob felt it, something sliding up his spine from inside. Cold. Wet. Wrapping around his ribs like a second skeleton. The roots were inside him now. His skin began to split. He looked down and saw bark forming along his veins. Leaves pushing from his fingers. His eyes rolled back as voices filled his skull. All the barrows. All the victims. All the harvests that came before. All of them inside him. And in the center, one voice. Older than the farm. Older than language. We sow in blood. We reap in pain. You are now the soil. Jacob's scream echoed across the fields. And the corn sang back. The cornfield was no longer a place. It was a creature. Jacob staggered through it in the pitch dark, blood oozing from the root-pierced wounds in his arms and legs. The ground was soft, too soft. It gave under his weight like flesh, and every stalk of corn watched him with hollow, seedless eyes carved into their husks. He had escaped the ritual, barely. The cult had let him go on purpose. He knew that now. He was no longer a man to them. He was something growing. Something they had planted. The cornfield shifted behind him. Every time he turned around, the rows had changed. The paths twisted, curving in ways that made no sense. He tried to move toward the house. But every step brought him deeper. The whispers returned. Not just one voice now. Dozens. Hundreds. Moaning and murmuring just behind the corn, just out of sight. He walks the bloodline. Born of root, reborn in ruin. Let him grow, let him feed. Then something brushed his back. Jacob spun, shotgun aimed. Only to find nothing. But a few feet away, a scarecrow stood where there hadn't been one before. It wore his father's old flannel shirt and the remains of a hat Jacob had buried with him 5 years ago. Its burlap face had no mouth. Only a stitched smile and 2 black pits for eyes. Then it tilted its head. Jacob fired. The scarecrow didn't fall. It walked. Not like a man. Like something learning how to. Limbs jerking in unnatural directions, arms flailing as if it were being puppeted by worms. Jacob ran. The corn moved with him, growing taller, thicker, tighter. The leaves scraped against his face, drawing blood. The soil sucked at his boots like it didn't want to let him go. He pushed forward, breath ragged, heart hammering against his ribs like it wanted out. He could hear them behind him, multiple scarecrows now. Their legs dragged across the earth. And beneath their dragging feet, something deeper moved, roots shifting in hunger. Suddenly, he stumbled into a clearing. And froze. All around him stood crude wooden crosses. Dozens. Each one mounted with a scarecrow. Some wore old clothes he recognized, his mother's sweater, his uncle's overalls, his cousin's army fatigues. Their faces weren't just burlap. They were stitched human skin, eyes sewn open, mouths forever screaming. Beneath each scarecrow, a nameplate carved from bone. He read a few. Emily Barrow. Samuel Barrow. Lydia Barrow. Family. All of them. All those who disappeared over the last century. The Barrows hadn't left. They'd been planted. A low groan echoed through the corn. Jacob turned just in time to see the earth crack open beneath one of the crosses. A mass of vines and roots surged upward, pulling the scarecrow down into the ground like a puppet on strings. Another cross collapsed, then another. The scarecrows were being harvested. And the soil churned with hunger. Jacob ran again, trying to find the edge of the corn. He pushed through thick stalks, the husks whisper secrets as he passed. He couldn't block them out anymore. You will bloom in pain. You will feed the soil. You are the final fruit. Then he saw light. A lantern swaying in the darkness. He sprinted toward it. The light led him to a familiar tree, an old oak at the edge of the property. Beneath it stood Ruth, the old neighbor who'd warned him never to come back to the farm. Her eyes were milky white now. Her lips cracked and dry. But she looked at him with something like pity. You shouldn't have come back, boy, she whispered. The farm remembers. It never lets go of its blood. Help me, Jacob gasped. Please. I'm losing myself. You already have, she said. You're the last root. The final sowing. When the harvest moon sets, you'll be gone, and he'll rise in your place. Who? Jacob shouted. Ruth's eyes went wide. The one beneath. The flesh harrower. He's fed on barrow blood for generations. You're his vessel now. He just needed time to ripen you. Jacob fell to his knees. The bark had begun spreading again along his arms, up his neck. His fingers twitched like they weren't his own. You can still fight, Ruth said quickly. The soil takes what's buried. But it fears what's burned. She handed him a bottle of lamp oil and a pack of matches. Burn it all. The field. The barn. Even yourself if you have to. Or he comes through. And if he does, she trailed off. It won't stop at this farm. Then she vanished. Gone. Like smoke. Jacob stood alone in the corn again. The chanting began anew, closer now. The scarecrows moved between the stalks. Their stitched mouths opening. Their bones creaking. The corn leaned inward like jaws closing. Jacob lit a match. It trembled in his hand. Then he threw it. The oil burst into flame. The corn caught fire instantly, screaming. Yes, screaming. Not crackling. Screaming like a living thing being burned alive. The scarecrows ignited one by one, thrashing on their posts. Black smoke poured upward in twisting tendrils, forming faces in the sky, barrow faces. Then the ground split open beneath Jacob's feet. A voice deeper than hell itself roared from below. The final harvest has come. And something began to rise. Flames consumed the cornfield like a sacrificial pyre, painting the sky with hellish light. But even the fire, raging and devouring, could not stop what was rising. Jacob stood paralyzed at the edge of a yawning crack in the earth. From the pit came a stench of rot and centuries-old blood, thick enough to choke. Roots twisted and uncoiled like the fingers of a corpse clawing upward. Then a shape emerged, towering, sinewed with blackened veins and bark-covered limbs, its chest pulsing like a living furnace. The creature's face was a mass of stretched skin, stitched with corn husks and bone, crowned with twisted antlers draped in strands of rotting flesh. Its eyes were not eyes, they were burning hollows, twin portals into endless night. Jacob knew without question. This was the flesh harrower. The thing that had fed on his family's blood. That had corrupted the soil. That had waited, deep beneath the farm, for him. As the last of the corn shrieked into ash, the scarecrows collapsed like puppets with their strings cut. One by one, their bodies exploded into clouds of spores and moths, swarming upward into the dark clouds above. The sky opened. A harvest moon, massive and blood-red, loomed overhead like an unblinking eye. The wind was gone. The world stood still, watching. And then Jacob heard it, the voice inside him. You are the seed, it growled, not aloud but within his bones. You have ripened. You are mine. Jacob screamed and fell to his knees. His veins bulged, roots tearing through his skin. His fingers cracked and split. The bark spread across his chest. Something was growing inside him, something alien, ancient, alive. But even as he writhed, he held the matchbox. The fire hadn't been enough. Not alone. He remembered Ruth's words, the soil takes what's buried. But it fears what's burned. He needed to go deeper. With a trembling hand, Jacob picked up the last bottle of lamp oil from his satchel. He doused himself with it, soaked his arms, chest, even his face. He stumbled toward the edge of the pit, where the Harrower loomed like a mountain of rot and rage. It laughed. "Burning won't save you," it snarled, reaching out with a limb of writhing tendrils. "You are me. And I am all." But Jacob did not hesitate. He struck the match. The flame trembled in the windless air. It lit his sleeve. Then his chest. And Jacob jumped into the pit. The world exploded. Fire met flesh, bark met bone, and the Harrower screamed, not from pain, but fury. The creature twisted violently, limbs flailing, mouth splitting open into a maw that reached down its torso. Jacob burned, but he did not scream. He was beyond pain. He saw flashes, visions in the smoke. His great-grandfather standing at the edge of the corn. His mother whispering to a mirror in the attic. Children running from the scarecrow barn, only to be pulled underground by living vines. All of them had resisted. All of them had failed. But Jacob burned. He was the final barrow. The last seed. And now, he would be the cleansing flame. The fire surged through the pit like an inferno swallowing a beast's throat. The Harrower shrieked, flailed, and began to collapse inward. Roots ignited. Flesh cracked and fell in charred sheets. Jacob felt his consciousness fade as the bark on his skin blackened and peeled. His eyes boiled in his skull. But he smiled. He had stopped it. He had broken the cycle. Then, silence. Hours passed. The fire smoldered. Ash fell like snow. And the farm was still. No whispering corn. No scarecrows. No blood-choked earth. Just silence. From the charred pit, a hand emerged. Blackened. Twisted. But alive. It was Jacob. Or something wearing Jacob's shape. He crawled from the earth, eyes glowing faintly red. Bark still clung to his limbs. But he breathed. The moon had vanished. The night returned to normal. And Jacob stood at the edge of the ruins of his family farm, reborn in fire and horror. But something was wrong. The soil beneath his feet still pulsed. A soft heartbeat echoed through the ash. Then a whisper in the wind. Harvest never ends, it only begins again. Jacob looked at his hands. Roots twitched under the skin. The fire hadn't destroyed the Harrower. It had moved it. Into him. And now, the hunger, was his. Jacob stood in the ruins of Barrow Farm, a silent husk beneath the ashen sky. The fire was long gone, but its heat lingered on his skin. Or what remained of it. His hands, blackened, cracked, moved like wood splintering under strain. His heartbeat thudded not in his chest but in the soil beneath him. The Harrower had not been slain. It had been replanted. Inside him. At first, Jacob tried to resist. He fled from the pit. Stumbled through the field's scorched remains. But with every step, the land called him back. Each gust of wind carried whispers in his ears, like a mother crooning to her newborn. You are ours. You were always ours. His reflection in the muddy trough behind the barn no longer showed a man. His eyes glowed amber in the dark. Veins of green and black pulsed beneath bark like skin. His teeth, they were growing, long, sharp, capable of chewing root and meat alike. That night, under a choking blanket of stars, he found the graveyard behind the barn. The markers had long since crumbled, simple wooden crosses overtaken by vines. But something had begun digging them up. Jacob watched in horror as clawed roots, gnarled like talons, unearthed bones. Skulls with corn stalks growing from the sockets. Femurs wrapped in moss and hair. The dead were sprouting. And he could feel them all. Inside him. Feeding him. He collapsed to the ground, trembling. "No," he gasped, his voice half-choked with dirt. "This isn't me. I'm not." But the wind carried the harrower's voice again, soft and terrible. "You are the harvest. The vessel. You bring the sowing." And behind him, the field began to grow. Not corn. Not wheat. But flesh. Stalks of pulsing muscle. Skin stretched over branches. Mouths where tassels should be. All sprouting overnight, as if time itself bent to the will of the harrower. The final harvest was coming. And he was the one who would sow it. At dawn, Jacob wandered the nearby woods, searching for a way out, a sign, a miracle. He thought if he could make it far enough from the farm, the thing inside him would die. But the forest was changing too. Trees whispered in his wake. Squirrels and birds lay twisted, entrails merged with bark. Even the air tasted of rot. And then he heard the sound. Footsteps. He turned. In the distance, a car rolled up the gravel road. A family of 4. Lost. Tourists. Campers. Something normal. Jacob waved frantically, stumbling from the woods, screaming for them to stop. But when they saw him, skin flaking, mouth bleeding black sap, bark crawling across his chest, they screamed and drove. He dropped to his knees. But as the dust settled, a single child's toy fell from the car. A plastic sheep. It rolled to Jacob's feet. He picked it up, cradling it, trembling. Then he looked back toward the house. The vines were growing across the barn doors now. The scarecrows had returned, but now their heads turned slowly as he passed, alive, watching, waiting. The harrower's voice rose again in his head. "Let them come. Let the children walk your soil. Let the cycle begin again." Jacob howled. He tried to end it. He wrapped a rope around the rafters in the old silo. Climbed atop a rusted bucket. Took a final breath. But the rope snapped before he could fall. The silo bled. The walls wept sap and teeth. And Jacob laughed. A deep, wet, sick laugh that wasn't his own. There is no death for the seed. 1 week later, a real estate sign appeared on the road. Farmhouse for sale, fixer-upper. Perfect for families. The agent never came back after the open house. Her shoes were found neatly placed at the edge of the corn, now lush again, taller than ever. Weeks passed. A young couple bought the land, drawn by the cheap price, the isolation, the charm. They brought their daughter. A golden-haired girl who smiled too wide when she saw the scarecrows. "Can I feed them?" she asked. The mother laughed nervously. The father looked toward the house, already imagining the renovations. They didn't see Jacob watching from the trees. But the girl did. She waved at him. And Jacob waved back, bark-covered hand trembling. In his chest, the harrower purred. The sowing had begun. Years later, stories would circulate about the Barrow farm. Tourists who vanished. Families who disappeared without a trace. Children who screamed about the man in the corn. Local legends whispered about a thing that walked like a man but wasn't. About a farm that grew more than crops. About a curse buried so deep, no flame could reach it. And on certain nights, beneath the harvest moon, if you drove too close to Barrow Road, you might see him. A scarecrow without strings. Still. Silent. Watching. And if you ever feel something growing inside you after visiting, don't wait. Burn it. Before it's too late.